That's some of the conversation we've been having with the consultant. But this is their first shot, and so we're kind of putting it out there, see if there's any input on it. There was a municipal quarterly meeting where Robbie presented this to the municipalities that were there participating. They didn't have any edits or changes to it, but of course, if we change this, it will change the map. I don't have the ability to do that on the fly here, but we can have the conversation. I can refer the criteria the planning commission wants back to if it's different, back to the consultant, and then they can plug it in and then have the map. The main thing is relative to the criteria. If you want to add criteria, we need to make sure that we have mapping capability for that. That the data is in the GIS in order for the system to pull it out. That's all I have for an introduction. If there's any questions on that at this point, before we get into the actual discussion, or TK, if you want to add anything from the conversations we had, did I hit the highlights?
Your next portion will be what's the relevance to the planning commission, right? I mean, that sounded like a speech like we were looking for more bodies to be on like a committee.
Yes.
That's really not what we're doing here. We're trying to I don't know what we're doing with the planning commission, but or create policy that does what? Makes these.
It's not creating the policy. It's is this the right criteria for identifying housing sites? Then also from that, once that's all done, the consultant will come up with some policy, some policy language. And that would be something that the planning commission would consider separately as part of a master plan. But this is kind of that first step of getting to the criteria, which will then help inform the policy language.
Carl, the front piece on the document you sent out that was attached to the agenda says housing study.
Mm-hmm.
These pages say affordable housing study. And I always thought that affordable housing study was, I may have been mistaken about this, but I thought that was a centerpiece, or at least a major part of this overall study. And is that true or not?
That is true. There is a need for affordable housing, but there's a need for housing in general as well. So it's kind of the big umbrella is the housing strategy, and then focusing in on parcels where you can get higher densities, or more of the ones that are inside the municipal limits, where you've got public water, public sewer, infrastructure for roads, services that people can walk to, that kind of thing.
Are you ready for recommendations?
I'll look at the chair.
I would just, see if anyone else had any general questions before we get into a conversation about recommendations. My question is, when you say they look at parcels with availability, does that mean vacant land, land for sale, land owned by, what is?
Yes, there's vacant lands. There's lands owned by the county. Mm-hmm. Basically, it's lands that have development potential that are currently underutilized from a development perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So is that including privately owned properties?
Yes.
But no buildings.
Right. Generally, yeah.
There are buildings available.
Well, there might be a 40-acre piece that has one building on it that.
There are buildings in town.
Oh no! Oh yes, no. It does not include where there's underutilized buildings. Like you have a large building that could be converted to affordable housing. It does not include that.
Okay.
Great.
So
thank you.
Basically, the criteria is for vacant land. That's really what we're looking at. Vacant land.
Effectively, yeah.
And that may not be the best strategy, because that means grounds up construction for what we're looking to do versus conversion.
But if there are particular parcels that you know of that have buildings that could be used, a school that's closed down or whatever, whatever that might be, we can identify specific parcels to the consultant as well. So that could be input because they don't know the area to that level of detail. we can give them specific parcels to incorporate into here.
Okay, I mean, it stands out right away is the old hospital. It's downtown. We've looked at that, walked through it. It's just sitting empty.
Okay.
Those conversations,
Notepad.
and then catty corner across the street was the old Spindle School. And there are vacant buildings.
Is this for like, who is like acting on this? Is this the private sector acting on this stuff, or is this?
What do you mean acting?
Like who's gonna take the hospital and turn it into low income housing?
This is identifying it, and then we'll come up with the strategies of how to encourage the development of that. Does it mean there's water infrastructure that needs to be upgraded for it, sewer infrastructure, in order to try to encourage the development, but it's still going to be driven by the private sector.
Well, I think that, we need to put, personally, at a glance right off the bat, I think this is way too broad, and I don't know if it's gonna get us anywhere. I think that you should be looking at it from an angle like, we're gonna start providing some incentives, and people that say, man, I've been thinking about putting some low-income housing on my 40 out back for a long time, and they come and say, where are we at? Because we're trying to push people into, or make them think that, yeah, this is prime, but they have no interest in doing any of this stuff. I don't really.
Again, that's part of the strategy. Once it gets into that policy language, yes, what are the incentives? How do we get housing built? But this is identifying where we want the housing built. Then it's how do we get it built? There's two pieces to that.
Gotcha.
My question, Carl, is what's the definition of affordable housing? In whose estimation is anything affordable?
Well, affordable housing, HUD, Housing Urban Development, has criteria for affordable housing based on the number of people in the family, the median income. That they have a whole formula for identifying low, very low, moderate income level for affordability. But that's really only if you're getting into a kind of, call it a deed restriction, something that says, a HUD program where you have to, whoever is buying it has to qualify at that level in order to get the unit. Affordable housing is not just you build a bunch of units and whatever the market bears, you can get for it.
My next question was going to be, is this going to be, developers driven or individual private homeowner driven?
Well, it's putting the roadmap out there that it could be either one.
Okay.
But as Hardy was getting to, what are the incentives? Is the municipality going to put the infrastructure in so that will help reduce the cost of construction to help make it more affordable? Because then you're putting the infrastructure costs into the cost of the units.
Next thing is, I think these people that are doing this map need to actually look at Cedar Ridge. I don't think there's any room for development up there. I think we're full flood.
Well, this, like I said, this is a GIS database driven map, and that's where the criteria comes in, and then based on that is the map's generated from that. And so that's where this is really kind of the key piece. What's the criteria? What's the ranking? And then based on that and the mapping of that, they plug it in and the map generated from that.
Maybe to follow up on Hardy's, who's the audience for what we're doing?
You mean the audience? I mean, it's.
Is it the public? Are we doing this for everybody, or are we doing this for people who are just interested in, their focus is affordable housing? I'm just trying to figure out. Sort of with Hardy, maybe we ought to be looking at these incentive programs instead of, does it matter where the ground is? The list is great. I don't know that if I can make a list, that would be great. And if everybody meets that list, that's a dream. You know that never happens, right? That's just the reality of developing.
But could a policy, the next step policy be, kind of based on this weighted thing? So people with, a score from 80 to 100 qualify for X number of incentives or whatever,
Mhm.
you know, like the incentive theoretically could be based on our priorities, so that we're not giving incentives to people building apartment complexes way outside of kind of these parameters.
Right, so the parcels, numbers 1 through 20, the ones that are scoring the best would be the lowest numbers. Yeah, maybe there are more incentives than the ones that score differently. Doesn't mean that there aren't other parcels out there that could be used for affordable housing, and that's part of the discussion as far as the strategies.
I think beggars can't be choosers at this point, and I think we need to start way lower than this, and just incentives, see what the private sector brings to us, because, I mean, this is just a blanket map that anybody with any common sense would already know what this is. I mean, we just start in the middle of the city and work out, and if it's got a field in it, it's probably not the greatest, so.
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily that way. I mean, you see, a couple parcels inside the town of Cedar Ridge that are within the top 10, and then it goes higher from that. But when you get to Orchard City, that's not the case, because they don't have sewer.
These ones in the town of Cedar Ridge, that all comes back to that, is the municipalities ready to work or not? I mean, if the municipalities are reluctant to do any of this stuff, people are gonna continue going out, and, we've got a board member that knows how that they're targeted.
That's why this is called planning. We're trying to plan to try to encourage this to happen,
Well, we've been planning the whole time, and it hasn't happened for 20 years.
because it really has been planning for 20 years.
So one of the incentives, since we're talking about incentives, is the price of land.
There's zero.
Preferably, I think, yeah. But thereby comes publicly owned land, which I do not see as a criteria. I heard you mention county-owned land, but I don't see it as a criteria. But I would add to that, county, city, special district, any publicly owned land, schools, that could be accessed for zero and dedicated to affordable housing. And to identify those as part of that criteria, no matter where they're located.
Hunsicker Elementary, never put that on the list.
I don't like the idea of county land or city-owned land being dedicated. I mean, that sounds like you're gonna give it away to somebody to build a house on.
You are.
If you give it to somebody, they're not gonna respect it.
That's the idea.
Next thing you know, it's trash.
Well, not necessarily. I think if you incentivize properties with zero cost land, you gotta have money to build a thing. You gotta get it from somewhere. And somebody's gotta buy that thing. You're talking about owner occupied housing, I'm assuming, or at least some apartments maybe and thrown into that, but generally some owner occupied housing. And that's going to bring some equity of that individual into that property, Lane, and I think that's really important. That's really the housing authority strategy here. They started out with individual houses all over. They're not owned by the individuals, but they have been really pretty well taken care of by individual families that get into those houses. And I think if you had ownership, it would even be that much more taken care of. So I want to try to persuade you differently. I think the notion that public land going into that is a good thing. We need housing for economic development. We need housing for good communities. And I know that sort of philosophical belief that if you give it away, it's going to go to crap. I just think there's all kinds of examples where that's not been the case.
It's hard to revamp like an old school and turn it into apartments or something. I mean, there is value there, but time you go through that, I'm almost guaranteeing you're better off starting with a clean slate and run it. I mean, we're planning here, right, Carl? So obviously it's hard to plan when you're tearing half a building down and building it back.
I'm not sure I agree with you, Marty. I think you've got some structures out here, between Paonia and down in Delta.
Which one?
In Paonia, you have the old school.
Old school.
The old middle school.
Gotcha.
But you have a school district that wants $3 million.
I thought they sold it.
I haven't seen it. whatever? And the answer is, it makes it a project unaffordable. I guess I'm trying to say, if we're creating incentives,
Okay, so what are you getting with that? What are you buying there?
the school.
The tap, the tap, right? The land itself
Yeah,
versus, I mean, what is the map value of that land, a new tap or whatever to start new and not come in there and refurbish everything for like, we're talking like density, right? We're looking for density here with affordable housing, obviously. We're on 38 units, not 7 or 5. So I do think that on the remodel work, I'm not saying there's not one or two, but at a general form, you know, coming in there and starting over for low income housing, you're gonna be as much or more than, you know, if you just started fresh.
I'm not on board with you, but I agree what you're saying. I think first attempt to me is, I'm not sure you can build yourself, well, you know, affordable housing is not the same as, to me, as workforce housing. There's two different levels of affordable housing. Affordable housing, like we're talking about, is based on the adjusted percentage of your average median AMI, 60%, 80%, 120%. And there are a lot of conversations and groups actively working on workforce housing, you know. But I don't know that lends itself to what you're doing here. And that involves municipal property that they're contributing to be able to build the workforce housing. Because it's only the beginning of what has to be to bring the cost down. It isn't just the land, it's utilities, taps, all those things. If you're even gonna be close, there's been a project that's been looked at, and even with all that free, no charge for taps, sewer, all those things, and the land is free, there's still $200,000 per unit deficit. But you've got to find gap financing. You've got to find someone to get. So even with those free things, it's difficult to build. And I keep thinking, well, there are structures, you know, they're privately held, or they're held by school districts, whatever, that I think lend themselves. The old hospital is one. We've toured that with private companies as well. It has all the utilities. It has infrastructure. It probably has asbestos. It's going to have plenty of issues. But you're there with a structure that I would say gives you a better start than if you start from scratch.
It sounds like both Steve and DK agree on adding a publicly owned land criteria to the list. How do other people feel about that?
I think it would probably be useful
Yeah.
to identify it.
It's a short list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on where that gets weighted? I mean, we're gonna have to do some math here.
Yeah, might want to get through what all the criteria are, and then we have to go back through and do the math to
we
get it
got
to
a
add to 100.
high priority, low priority.
Right.
Anyways, just yeah.
I just have one question to clarify this in my mind. This looks a lot like what we used to call in the military a decision-making matrix, where you decide which is the best or the worst. Are we to prioritize all these vacant pieces? Is that what we're trying to do and give them a ranking in our county? Or are we just saying, hey, this looks good, if you want to build here, you're 12 sites, you're on 3% grade? But, I mean, so, what's our purpose with doing this? What's the goal we're trying to put out?
The goal is to identify parcels that meet the criteria that you're prioritizing, and how they rank according to that, from 1 to 100.
This is an information document that comes to open to the public, whoever wants to see it.
Absolutely, yes.
And then the other part we need to talk about now is how to get housing on those pieces, because I think I read somewhere we want to try and use what's already out there first. Revitalize that stuff. We've got somewhere in our introduction to tonight's meeting.
See, none of that appears on this criteria. This is, to me, based on purely vacant land.
Yeah.
And not really incentivizing existing structures or repurposing. Yeah.
So, guess I'm struggling to, why do I need this? If it's just to tell a contractor or an investor, say, hey, you wanna come to Delta? Hey, look at these pieces.
One reason you might need it, it's referring back to Kate's earlier comment about having a list of criteria available for incentivized money coming from a public agency, even a federal or state agency, having a game plan that's laid out. So we have criteria about new housing, and here's what it is. And if you've got some money, we want to talk to you about our criteria, which they're probably going to ask for anyway.
But then we say that if you do that, you have to build on these pieces, because this is where we want the growth to go.
Well, they would probably ask you, what's your criteria, what's your goal, what's your game plan, and if you had parcels identified for their money, that probably helps.
So in essence, we are making a decision on which parcels are to be higher priority than others.
Sounds un-American.
That's
I think
already,
so.
that's actually done in here, it's already
Yeah.
went through whatever, right?
Well, there's more than 100.
Hey, Carl, do you have any like numbers on how much of a
We
deficit?
only have 100 parcels we're considering for this. Is that,
What's that?
we only have 100 parcels, 100 parcels that were considered.
That were mapped.
That were mapped.
Right.
But we haven't decided out of those 100, which is the top one, the first one we wanna have filled. We haven't done any of that.
Well, it's not a matter of what, that's the first one to have built, it's the one that best meets the criteria. Doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna be the first one built.
Okay,
Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah.
So, but it would be, our best recommendation would be this one. It might
Right.
not be the first one.
Right, right.
Gotcha.
And so that kind of clears it up. So I thought that we were doing this to give each parcel a score. So like this parcel scores 80 out of 100 because it meets 80% of the criteria. This one scores 60%, this one scores 40.
That's another way to look at it.
That- yeah, I mean,
then you're identifying, you're not prioritizing lots, you're just saying this one meets all of these things that we really wanna see. And so if you have a score above 80, these are the incentives that we offer for that piece of land, whereas if your score is 20, this is what you can get.
Well, again, that's where the criteria, as long as it's mapped and mappable, yeah, there would be a numeric outcome based on the layers of the mapping that is there and that's available. Some of the limitation is there's some criteria that we don't have mapping for, like sewer line.
But are you saying that we're ranking them instead of scoring them? Like we're not
Yes.
giving them a score, we're ranking them?
Right,
priority?
right.
You say you don't have mapping for it, like sewer line?
Correct.
I think that's a major
You mean
kind
it's
of like problem with this in general is the limitations of the GIS. It seems like sewer and electricity are two major components that we'd want to
Well, wait a minute.
encourage.
The municipalities know where their sewer lines are.
They aren't in GIS. Doesn't mean they don't have it mapped. I guess maybe it's not in the database. It's not in a format to be able to pull it from GIS.
Is that because the GIS people have not talked?
They got it.
Or because they don't? the
Because
municipalities
not all the
don't manage
municipalities
GIS?
have it mapped in the GIS system.
So the information hasn't morphed or
And I would bet
migrated to the county GIS.
DMEA has it GIS. I mean, I've seen them out there doing that very thing, and we heard about that. Where they're GIS the location of their poles and their facilities.
Well, I mean, if you feel it's out there, we can put it in the criteria, and then the consultant, if they can find the information, will use it. Otherwise, they can't.
What
I mean,
happens-
that's all I'm saying.
What happens with a property that scores 100?
It would rank high.
What does it mean, rank higher? What does it mean to the let's say it's a private owner, and we go out and rank their properties, and we just said, we're about to say, you know, your property ranks the highest for affordable housing, and you
Yeah.
wanna put on apartments for market rate. What does it mean to that owner? Are we imposing something on these properties that?
No, it's like it's no different than zoning. You zone it rural
there's
industrial
no-
commercial. What's the difference? You've just increased the value if they want to develop it for commercial.
Well,
I mean,
zoning is-
that's what it is. It's a type of zoning.
But we're not rezoning, we're just
Well, we might, as a result of it, you might want to look at rezoning, the ones that are in the unincorporated area. Remember, we created the affordable housing overlay. So the parcels that score high may be designated with an affordable housing overlay.
Within the urban growth area.
Well, that's within the municipal boundary. This one, that's what that is intended, is the growth management areas.
Do you have numbers on like how much we're lacking of affordable housing right now? Is that 50 or 5,000?
I don't have that in front of me. Do you remember?
They gave us a Region 10 number, that was like 6 months ago. It was in the millions that we were short. I can't remember the exact number.
Millions.
Yeah.
Housing.
Millions of dollars, not,
Millions of dollars.
not.
We don't even have a million people here.
I mean, how many units? We don't know. I mean, because again, it depends on if you're doing affordable housing, what is the affordability level that you're targeting with that development. But unless it's deed restricted, it's not going to stay that way. You know, it's once it's market rate. But that's where TK was talking about the workforce housing. So you have, HUD has very low, moderate, and upper income. Well, there's a big gap between the moderate and upper income, and so you get people that are in certain professions that they make too much to qualify for moderate, but they don't make enough to actually buy a house at the upper income level. And that's that workforce. That's that kind of that middle area that workforce housing typically tries to target.
And part of it referred to as like attainable housing.
Yeah.
It's like it's a certain percentage of income level.
But effectively, they're competing with the same basis.
Yeah.
In our land use code, we already have a model in some ways for identifying parcels for special consideration called stewardship location, our stewardship section. And you could conceivably have something similar to that, special land use code consideration for housing or affordable housing areas identified on the map.
Well, that's where the strategy will bring in that piece of it, yes.
Yeah.
Anyone have any other criteria that you feel like is lacking from this list? Yeah, Matt?
I would, we beat this thing into the ground, the urban growth areas. If one of these parcels is within the urban growth area, would that not be a higher desire than lesser?
That's what I agree.
So increase the weight of the GMA.
Yeah, if you're talking about.
Well, you have within
Well,
municipal
when you-
boundary, but maybe we should say within the growth management areas, not an urban, or you change the name. I'm sorry, disregard.
But it's only, it's a pretty low weight compared to.
Well, yeah. So where do we want to push the growth? If it's outside of the urban growth area, we're looking at more costs for infrastructure. Sewer, power, water.
Yeah, that contradicts itself.
Well, and that's where, the next conversation is, if this is the criteria, then what numbers do you want to assign to it as far as that will give that priority?
Yeah.
Right now, the highest is within water provider service area. You would score 20 points.
If you're talking about the weighting, that was my initial reaction here too, was I agree within water service provider service area 20, but municipal boundary and growth management area, my initial reaction was put each one of those at 20. And then you're up to, that's kind of where we want to go, and then these other ones would fall into place, because if a parcel falls within those three areas, it's going to be close to a highway, it's going to be close to the major services and all the other stuff kind of trickle down, then those would be smaller percentages. I would rank those three as all 20, and if you hit all three of those, you got 60. That seems to me to filter down into the rest of the criteria pretty effectively, and then you got 40 points to allocate between these other ones. But if you hit those three, you're probably gonna be you have good proximity to school, you're gonna have good proximity to basic services and healthcare and all that other stuff, so.
I don't see anything about like the wastewater, wouldn't it be like, that be pretty priority right there?
Mhm.
I mean.
Well, and
we're
that's
talking
what,
about water, but-
that's what Carl was talking about, the sewer isn't mapped in GIS, so you can't map that criteria.
Yeah, but as far as growing out from a municipality, that would be the incentive to annex in and get on their sewer system. Correct. I mean, that should rank up there as far as water, and obviously, we did our work right on the urban growth area in the first place. Both those should be right there on any one of those properties.
So, can we assume that if you're in the city proper, there's probably some type of wastewater available, right?
Not in Orchard City.
What?
Not in Orchard City.
Orchard City doesn't have any parcels on the map. So, I guess we don't have to deal with Orchard City anymore, we'd have to say Denver, right? I mean, it's not on the map, because they don't have any sun. But if you're in the, I'm trying to go criteria, I'm trying to rank these. So what ranks higher is in the cities than urban growth or growth management areas. Because growth management areas and urban growth require extensions
Yeah, they gotta
and then
expand.
annexations. So I'm looking at just from the development side, where is the higher likelihood of development to occur if there are city services already there? That's gotta be higher than, even if your parcel's next door to it and doesn't have any services.
A lot of our properties in the city have to still expand all that anyways. If there's a sewer, if it's there, it's probably already built, because it's an easy take. I mean, even if it's in the city, it's gonna have to be expanded too, just like anything just right outside the city. It's gonna have to be expanded, because their system is pretty much built out. They don't have this system out there hanging out waiting for someone to come through and say, hey, let's do it. They're gonna have you build it for them.
Well, no, they've got plenty of parcels that are next to their water and sewer that haven't been tapped yet. You've got vacant land in all of, it's Delta, I think in all these cities, somebody just hasn't developed it. So the services are right there. You don't have to extend them, they just haven't been accessed to the property specific. Versus, you've got a piece on the outside of the city and, oh yeah, the city sewer water is now half a mile away, I gotta bring it to this parcel. Those parcels could be in the urban growth areas because they're close to the city and ultimately we want to get them annexed, but that can't rank as high as a parcel in town.
So you don't think GMA and municipal should be equal weighted?
Not at all. So, because infrastructure, so it's all about density, right? The higher the density you can fit, the more affordable or attainable housing you can build. And the density, you're going to get the highest density in the areas with the greatest amount of infrastructure. So capacity on the infrastructure system has to be one of the criteria. For instance, I'm pretty sure City of Delta and I know City of Cedar Edge have a lot of capacity on their water system available for water and wastewater systems. City of Cedar Edge can double the amount, their population base on their current wastewater and water system and water rights they have. I think Delta is also similar to that.
Same as Hotchkiss, they have a processing, they have a wastewater process that can process 1 million gallons, and they just put 1 million gallon water storage in, and they only serve half.
So is there a way
So
to map or
rather than,
understand that?
sorry, I was just saying,
Yeah.
rather than saying within water provider service area, saying capacity within
That needs to be one of the criteria.
water provider, yes, because Crawford doesn't have
Yeah.
a whole lot of capacity. They have a water service area, so you want to give them 20 points just because they're in a service area even though there's no water.
Right.
Right.
Kind of example.
So infrastructure has to be more heavily weighted for sure. In the municipally served infrastructure, the availability for that has to be heavily weighted versus just growth management area. And then capacity should be part of that criteria. And I don't know how you find that out other than just conversations with the municipalities themselves.
City of Delta plant was built in the 80s for a residential capacity of 25,000 people.
Yeah, so that brings a lot of weight to that criteria.
How many are on it now?
$24,999. 7,000.
But they probably also serve areas outside the city too,
No.
on that sewer system.
Sanic,
City of Cedar
most
has
of anything that would be
57%
capacity.
capacity on sewer and 50% on water.
Which, who is that?
City of Cedar Rapids is 57% on capacity on the sewer and 53% on the water.
Right.
So technically, you can almost double.
You can almost double, like you said.
Without doing
But
extra.
I
That's
think
gonna
once
be a
you,
big traffic. Those
once
are
you
big-
get to 80% or something on your sewer, somebody starts looking at whether they're planning for increasing the capacity. I don't remember that criteria. But density is the number one driver. And so even density, districts within the municipalities, an R1 district in Cedar Edge allows four units per acre, basically, for single family, or 4 duplexes per acre. And so that's the max you can build. R2 allows more. And so if you're really digging into this, you're looking at, existing density allowances, though that can be changed, obviously.
Well, and that's where this map would help inform, should zoning be changed for a certain area, certain parcels.
In the city, in the municipality.
Well, yeah, it would help inform the municipalities,
Recommended change, yeah.
not just the county, yeah.
Yeah, are the towns really plugged into this? Apparently you met with them.
The quarterly, municipal quarterly.
Quarterly.
Yeah, we did.
So are they jazzed about it, or is it something that?
Do they want it? They want to grow.
Yeah, I mean, they thought it was very informative and they appreciated it. I wouldn't say they were jazzed, but they thought it was.
How jazzed do you get about planning, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, but they were appreciative. I mean, remember going back, we had this conversation, the dollars were put in for this study, and it weren't small amount of dollars, there were significant dollars put in to say, we need that inventory, we need the criteria. So now we have it, and what was not clear and what needs to be further spelled out is how is everybody going to use it? And so this is part of this conversation that you all are starting tonight, that will need to continue with them. So it was just presented as a
You really
first
need
step.
to, I mean, Tate makes a great point about capacity.
Right.
And that's a municipal, or
Right.
a tri-county,
Right.
water, in private water company thing.
But really sewer, I think, is the biggest thing, because you can't do high density without sewer.
Right. But it's significant more information than we had, so.
Yeah.
Any other criteria that folks are not seeing they want to see, or something on this list that's weighted in a direction you would want to change? I mean,
I think what Tate said there, you can't do high density without the sewer. Obviously, these ones that are out here far that I'm seeing, you can't really do them, and you can't annex into a city. So, I mean, I don't see how those are in the color code that they're at right now. I agree, you have to be tied into the city. You don't take too tied into the house. It's just a city.
Do we need to make that a criteria?
I would like to see sewer on there if there's any way we can get that info, or if
Well-
this map can get, translated into basically take all that information we can get from the GIS and then create another map that might layer on some other information. I don't
So
know.
let's just create the criteria that you think
Yeah.
is what it should be, and then we'll work with the consultant to work with that.
Okay.
So that's why the ones in red are the ones that I've heard the planning commission highlight on the screen. I've been kind of going on the fly.
Would we be better served with just dealing with 20 parcels? Why do we need 100?
We don't, we can say we want the, top.
20 parcels is a lot of parcels.
But again, not all of them are gonna get developed. I mean, it's really gonna be market driven. Once this is established, it's like zoning, it's still market driven. Just cause you zone it commercial doesn't mean it's gonna get built as commercial in the next 10 years.
Right.
So we need to assign a score to each parcel.
No,
basically already
no,
has
it's a
it.
criteria.
Criteria.
Yeah.
So does that need to be applied to parcels?
It will get applied, yes, to parcels within the county. And then that will develop a map, and some parcels will elevate based on their availability. Again, that's when we get into, some of the parcels that are being filtered out are the ones that are already developed. There's no point in scoring them if they aren't really, there's not an opportunity there.
Are all these parcels gonna change if you change this criteria?
Yeah, the map, the map that you see there will definitely change by changing the criteria and changing the scoring.
Like, for example, I'm seeing this 43 way out on Cedar Mesa.
Yeah.
I mean.
There's no sense in that.
Well, and that's why
People to do this stuff.
that's why it got mapped. So you look at the scores like, oh well, that makes sense. But then you look at it in a map, it's like, no, it doesn't make sense. There's parcels that are getting thrown in here that really don't make sense. So how do we adjust that criteria, the scoring then, so that when it comes out, it makes more sense?
I don't know where to go from here with what we're doing.
I think that the infrastructure should weigh by far heaviest, and availability to infrastructure, whether it's inside or outside the municipal boundary, because there are, or annexable, and that should be, that should drive proximity to schools and healthcare should be very low weighted at.
You could exclude some of the criteria that's on here if you want, if you don't think it's really, what is going to get the best results.
Honestly, I guess the healthcare.
Proximity to major highway, maybe that's not.
Delta's gonna.
Or it only, you only scored a 1 or something
Sure.
like that.
Yeah.
So you can't do that.
I would make a motion to scratch out preschool, because I feel like school kind of has that covered.
I think the highway means something, because that's,
Yeah, I'm not sure about the preschool either, especially at the weight it has compared to some other things.
Okay.
And since there aren't that many anyways.
One down.
I would second that. Scratch.
So Carl, what's the parcels 21 through 40? How did they get on that list? Were they
Well,
ranked?
all of them were based on this criteria.
They were ranked already.
They were ranked based on how they
So how they
got
scored.
vetted out, how they scored.
So they've already ranked them.
Right.
Okay, so.
Because,
61 through
so
80.
this is kind of the first filter, and then they go back and look at, are they undeveloped lands, are they available lands? So that's when they start looking at the assessor's data is it undeveloped or something to that effect?
See, to me, this map makes a lot of sense to me, because it's just identifying the areas in a more general sense, which we could develop our criteria, to suit, except for the Paonia issue, because how much water is available in Paonia?
Right now.
Well,
just like Orchard City.
David knows that there's however many water taps that have been sold.
Well,
West
that's
Elk is
the
one of
issue.
them, that sit out there, that are actionable, correct?
Right.
If West Elk would walk in the door or whatever company,
that's the big
say, we wanna
issue.
put them to use,
But they're still studying their capacity and what they actually have and what they can provide.
but
That's.
legally, doesn't West Elk have a right to come in and demand?
They can call the tabs and say, put them in play.
That's
But
right.
I think they would have to put infrastructure out there to get to it. I mean, I don't know, but that's always the big threat in Paonia, is that those 300 and some
Yeah.
tabs will come online, somebody will.
And they have land out south of town and east of
They
town.
do, they do.
All they need is a municipal district to build a sewer treatment plant. They've got a new town.
But as soon as you start building a sewer treatment plant, you're lowering the affordability, right? And so it should be dropping down the list for.
They probably would build exclusive home sites up there.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not talking about affordable housing out there. We're
Well,
talking
even
about-
attainable workforce housing. I think personally, and it's just an opinion, that workforce housing is more important than affordable housing. That normal people can afford. But that's just an opinion. Cause it doesn't have to be deed restricted or incentivized, it can help build wealth. If you can get it out there and help people into the community and people can sell from under rate, I think that's important, but that's an opinion.
Well, you need to mix of strategies, you're right about that. Not all eggs in one basket in terms of housing.
Right.
Huh. So are we actually gonna try and judge some of these after, right now, or what
No.
are we gonna do?
Once we get this, I'm gonna give it to the consultant, and they'll plug it back in and then come out with a resulting map from that.
Alright. So we should probably go through this list and hack some out of there?
We'll, just give me some numbers, and when we get to 100, we might need to make an adjustment.
So the preschool shouldn't be in there.
Well, that was the recommendation, so I just threw 0 in there, and, you know, that can change, it's not set in stone yet.
So, just a question on the developable slopes.
Yeah,
Parcels having more land on shallower slopes are more preferable.
because they're more developable, you know, trying to build density on a steep
Yeah.
slope is gonna cost more.
Yeah.
Sure.
So should we just have parcels having shallower slopes are more preferable? Because, well, it says
More land on shallower slopes.
So it gives to me that we're going based on like size of the parcel, not the size of the land that's, you know, actually usable. So I just.
So how would you word that?
Just parcels that have shallower slopes are more preferable. So parcels that have under a 30% grade instead of the size of the property.
Well, does that go back to the density criteria, you know, that Tate brought out? Parcels that can have higher density, meaning that's gonna lend itself to slopes and wetlands and floodplains and everything else. Aren't we just saying parcels that can have higher density are gonna have a higher value?
Yeah.
But I think
that's
Victoria's
right.
saying the same thing, it's just
I know,
that rather,
it
but,
is.
so you have a parcel that half of it's, you know, much steeper.
Well, yeah.
You know, the way it's worded now, that would actually get filtered out. The land would need to be flatter land, so.
But if we're just saying a parcel has the ability for higher density for a greater number of units, does it eliminate, do we need all this shallower land and do we need any of that?
I mean, that's like asking if we need any of this. And again, it's going back to how policy is made around incentives and, you know, maybe future land use code updates. I mean, half of this list is somewhat just intuitive of, yeah, the places we're giving more weight to are more developable.
But maybe
in
it's a lower
general.
score
But
than the 12 that's there right now.
Isn't it already illegal to mess with wetlands?
It's not illegal, but I mean, we don't want to develop in wetlands. We don't want to develop in floodways. We want to minimize development in floodplains. But that's the idea is starting to map that. You know, so if the parcel is 50% in a floodplain, then should it even be, you know, should it score?
Well, yeah, but again, that goes back to density. If it's in a floodplain, you can't build on it. If you can't build on it, the density's lower on that piece.
And this map is helping to inform that. Yes, that's the planning aspect of it.
I have another comment, if you will. I think there is another piece that we are missing in terms of land, and that's the suitability to build on the land. Meaning the structure of the soils, if it's, I can't remember the exact term they use, but there are some areas in Delta where the soil structure, the rock, the sand, the dirt, and all that is not suitable to build on because it shifts too much. Should that not be a criteria for suitable housing? Otherwise, you have to do some extensive foundation work.
Kind of similar to the slopes.
Well, it's more than slopes.
I said similar to it. I didn't say it's the same.
Compactability,
Generally, you have to do soil tests before you can build, you know this. So you can mitigate some of that if it's present, correct?
Yeah, you can mitigate it, it just costs money.
I mean, basically for that, we probably need to look at USDA soil mapping. So it's whatever they have in their system.
I got the new one if you want, just came out like a month ago.
I think Carrie has that anyway for
The soils?
soil, yeah.
She can,
Yeah.
she has the ability to pull
So
them.
just to summarize where we are, we're saying properties that were within the city have a higher value, or we want properties that have municipal services have a higher value. That's a criteria for capacity, right? So I'm just trying to get to where Tate was going. Let's put higher value on those to leave what's left sub minimal. You know, I mean, I think he's right. I mean, major highways for whether it's preschool or schools, I don't know if that's the weight as much as, you're not wrong, man, about soil. Developable lands, I think that's one of the criteria, right? Developable, did I read that in here? Did I see developable lands?
Slopes.
Oh, developable slopes, okay, well, I guess that would be, we could include terrain and geotechnical information in there, developable slopes and just the geotechnical information, which is really about it. If you have expansive clay, you're gonna need to do a lot more mitigation. And if you get a parcel that's in the city, has water and sewer available, has beautiful sand, it's gonna be 90. Everything else could be 10 points, and those are still the best criteria to make a per piece.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So let's just put a higher value. They've got so many criteria here, breaking it down to add to 100, when really there's only about 3 or 4 that could add up to about 90 or 99, and everything else could be 1 to 10. Because
So should we say accessibility to utilities with capacity, power, water, sewer, natural gas? We haven't even talked about natural gas. You wanna have that in a high density area, don't you?
Yeah, I think so. So I wrote out a list here that is real similar to what TK is saying, and I'm, like sewer, water, and power, I would give 20 points to on the availability spectrum, and then 5 for capacity. So it's a 2-tier list because you can expand capacity, but if it's available, boom, done. And then slopes, I think, is more important than gas because you can certainly build high density without gas, especially the way things are going electric more and more with heat pumps these days. So I think gas falls way down the list compared to sewer, water, and power.
unless you're Black Hills Energy.
Yeah, but man, heat pumps, these days there's a lot of houses that you can do that are efficient for heating and cooling without gas.
Yeah, dude.
Do you want those separated, these utilities separated out, or would you want to have proximity to water, sewer, and electricity as just one line item, and capacity maybe as separate line items, or capacity of water, sewer, electricity? So it's a whole package. It's kind of.
I did water, power, and I'm just a guy, but sewer, water, power in that order. I think and then 20 points for availability and 5 for capacity. So they each get 25. That's 75% right there. And then slopes are important. Slopes and soil conditions, something like that, 10 points, and then gas 10 points. There's 95 points. I think that's 95% of the importance for attainability, affordability.
You're talking like already there, or are you talking easily expanded? Because that's gonna chop your list right off there. If it's already
Available.
there, finding that
Available.
unicorn.
You have to expand all of it, right? I mean, if you have 10 acres or 40, it's only to the lot line. It might be luckily going through the lot line, but you have to expand it. But it's available to
Annexation,
expand.
everything you're talking annexation.
No,
within
No.
it could be within the
there are
municipality.
parcels in the city that have
can't
all
get
these
them.
criteria that would have 95 points just sitting there. They would have sewer and water right on the road in front of them. They'd have
So
electric
those
running
will,
behind them.
those will be the highest, obviously.
Correct.
Yeah, I think.
One step down would be the ones you're gonna annex in.
Right.
So that's right. They wouldn't get as many points
Yeah.
for sewer for the utilities if they're not within the service area or they're outside of the city. If we're staying within the municipal areas and you've got a piece outside, it'll weigh less.
But close, like if annexation unachievables. And if the services are available, right, and you just have to get them
Well,
to the
you
lot.
have to, then you have to annex to get the sewer.
Right.
You can't get one without you, so you can't get sewer, so you'll miss that 20 right there.
Well,
if you don't annex.
right. So I don't think annexation is a big
Well,
issue
that's what I'm saying.
to
So
overcome.
why is it different? Because you can't do that without annexing it.
It is one more hurdle you have to jump through, so it would be slightly.
So should that be a criteria? Is the piece annexable?
It has to be to get a sewer tap.
Yeah, I mean, if it meets those other criteria, sewer, water, power, it probably is, or sewer and water, it probably is annexable.
Because they won't let you on the sewer unless you annex.
Or it's already in the city.
This is kind of where some interesting things happen, because Hotchkiss apparently has, when we ran into this, a policy about non-annexation, even though county parcels are close, and their policy has been, we looked at that pretty closely, that if they have to serve it with other city services, they don't want to annex it.
Yeah, it's all of them,
They'll
I mean,
service it, but not annex it.
Yeah, it's crazy from a corporate growth, corporate protection strategy, but nonetheless, that was kind of their philosophy. And so it's going to be up, it's going to be a municipal decision about what's annexable and not what's not.
So they would offer sewer and water without having to annex. I mean, I think that would rank higher because it's less red tape to jump through. When you're going through development, you're just dealing with the county instead of the city, as long as you can get the services.
You're saying this is in Hotchkiss right now?
That's how I understand it.
You can water tap and a sewer tap and not be in the city.
They've extended water and sewer out to the school, and there are parcels between the city and the school that are not in the city. And the services are right in front of them.
And we were in a
That's
subdivision
not
with the,
Well, again, they chose to develop their system themselves to the school, which is not uncommon for municipalities to say, we're going out this way.
Yeah.
And then people who choose to tap into it, then are gonna get looked at annex, and that's exactly right. And so those parcels would rank high, because they could have sewer and water right next to them, but not be in the city.
So
Yeah, real high.
with your ranking, do you think then within municipal boundary and within growth management area is just like a non-factor that basically de facto ranks?
I mean, if I was a developer and I heard what TK is saying, that I can get sewer and water, or Steve's saying, without having to be in the city, I have a higher preference for that personally, because I can just deal with the county.
Yeah.
No building code.
Yeah, no building code. I mean, right. So I think that's
That's a big one.
So strike these two.
That's my personal feeling.
So I guess I'm coming to, that
But I think that's a rare case too.
all these criteria, hopefully, they feel real good, but when it comes down to it, there's only gonna be about 3 or 4 pieces, there are 3 or 4 real criteria that determine whether something's even gonna looked at. After that, whether it's close to healthcare is immaterial.
Yeah.
Proximity to schools. Everybody in the county is served by school bus routes.
Right.
So, that doesn't even a high rate either.
Does it need to be there?
No.
But I don't know if school capacity is an issue. If you're building a 200 unit complex and the school's already at capacity, I guess they would just expand.
We have
And
just
they
the opposite.
welcome those. Right, exactly.
our enrollment is so far down.
Yeah.
The schools are shut down.
You probably know more than anyone. Are they looking at closing any other schools?
So it's a non-factor.
I wouldn't tell you
That's
that.
affordable housing in our terms.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could simplify it. Just
Can I
get a
back
few
up
things on the list.
Robbie, this group, Contour, was hired by the county to do housing, this is part of the housing assessment. What was the ask?
Remember that in our housing group that included all of the municipalities and that, there was a void, what does the county have? We didn't have a good criteria of what we do have as far as availability, primarily for that workforce housing. And so this group was identified, and you guys are adding to the database here. But it was to help build that bigger, because a lot of the city of Delta, and some of the other municipalities had their information. We didn't have ours, so. This is a bigger picture.
It seems like this is.
But all these pieces aren't just in the county.
No.
No, what it, by the way, tells us is that we have municipalities, at least two, probably three, that are not key for new affordable housing development. And at some point, they're gonna have to be told that.
Well, even housing development in general, Orchard City, you can barely get a water tap to build one house, let alone 20 or 40.
And you
Yeah,
can't
you
get,
can't.
and Paonia it would be added probably to that.
I mean, so it should be hardly on the list at all for any type of housing strategy. You can just do one-offs, barely. Unless you can get big acreage and drill big wells and stuff.
Maybe we ought to take a look at this in a different angle, like, some actual, Delta County, unincorporated Delta County housing, opportunities versus all this stuff that's gonna land in the city. I mean, they're thinking about their self, all the municipalities are.
Well, that's some of my point, Artie.
Yeah.
This was supposed to be done for Delta County.
I know,
Why do
but
we
what do
need
we
to
got in
even
the
look at
county?
this city properties?
Because they're in the county.
Well, we can't be like compared to.
But they already have
a
those.
sewer line running by it, cause everything's in the.
Well, that point of this is to inform though that there isn't much in the unincorporated area that it really is suitable. I mean,
Well, if you
but it
have-
depends on the criteria that you set. Right now, the way the criteria is, yeah, there are some parcels in the unincorporated area that are suitable. Based on the criteria that you're putting in there, that's probably gonna significantly reduce.
If the cities aren't ready to, join in on this, fight here.
But so if there's gonna be affordable housing within Delta County, most of it's gonna happen in the municipal areas.
So it's gonna be long coming then, from my experience.
What's that?
It's gonna be a while. These cities are hard to work with.
But if you go back to the criteria that Tate started
What
with,
do you
sewer
guys
and
think?
water, if you just had those maps alone, you would find county parcels in the county, I mean, Hotchkiss doesn't even barely make this list, it's got one little dot on it, yet I'll bet it has more ground that has municipal services running through the county
Yes.
than
There-
any other property.
There will be availability, not necessarily capacity. Crawford has, and I'm gonna use Crawford again, because it has infrastructure outside of the city limits, but they don't have capacity for water. They might for sewer, but they don't for water. So, yes, there will still be some parcels, and like you just talked about Hotchkiss, if you got a line running out there, you have availability. The question is, do they have the capacity to serve? So that's two pieces. So then you want to think about the scoring of how that works. Is capacity more important than availability? And flip what Tate was talking about.
Right, so I think, again, we go back to these criteria of services, right?
Mhm.
Maybe, if we're doing this for the county, maybe we don't need to put so much weight on to whether it's in the city, right? We're sort of eliminating that. What we're doing is, what parcels are closest to municipal services in the county, maybe some that have them there, and the ones that obviously where the municipal services run through them are gonna have a higher value than the ones that maybe have to extend it 500 to 1,000 feet or a half, not whatever it is. And that's how we're analyzing this for the county.
Yep.
We're doing this for the county. I don't think we need to rank the city parcels, because that's not, they do it themselves.
But all you're really talking about is those parcels you're talking about in Hotchkiss, because everybody else, you can't get on that sewer line unless you annex in.
Yeah.
Well,
It's just whatever you just came up with.
but I think
right
we're
there,
trying to
it's
come
all
up
one
with, yes, so, the annexation may be something that becomes part of it, but we're still trying to identify parcels that may be in the county that are adjacent, that are
Yep.
close to it.
But if you only focus on the county, then you're missing most of the conversation for housing strategy.
But that's what, who hired these people?
Yeah, but the county, it has cities within it, so as a planning into
But
the
didn't-
future.
Didn't Delta just do their own housing assessment without, they didn't need this, right?
Let's talk about it.
They just
They provided the data to Contour as well, so
I thought they did a separate housing assessment.
they did.
They did. Yeah, they've already, theirs is done. They're well past this.
But again, if we come back to the type of policy that this information will inform, there's possible policy decisions out there that go beyond what the Planning Commission can specifically has authority over. But we might still want to use this criteria to inform policy decisions that would affect parcels that are within the municipal boundaries, and that would help if we are trying to concentrate that development inward towards the municipalities or within it, that would incentivize those projects as opposed to the ones out in the county. So yes, if we look at only county, unincorporated properties, we can rank those and say what is the most suitable. But overall, if there's a policy or an incentive program, we still want to incentivize the municipal development. So we still want criteria that incentivizes the closeness to municipal services. And it's a little vague right now because we don't know what those policies or those incentives would be, but we don't want to cut out the ability to incentivize municipal development.
But,
I don't know who we is, but
we being the Delta County Planning Commission should be. Are we now saying to Delta's Planning Commission, hey, we're creating a criteria for you guys to follow? I don't.
No, but there could be an incentive program that anyone in the county, whether they're in a municipal boundary or not, can apply for.
Mm-hmm.
All of those properties within the city pay a county property tax, all right? So as a revenue stream for the county, if there's an absolute 100% link, for us just to say, well, we're going to look at the unincorporated area, not the municipalities, is ridiculous.
Plus, if you put this information out and Orchard City sees that they have very little, and they probably already understand this, capacity improvements for housing, they might get people onto their board who want to change that. And so it might incentivize, farther looking into the future for people that live in that area, if this information is put out there.
Victoria, did you have something?
Yeah, are we going to be doing a separate study for other types of housing? This is just affordable housing, right?
Well, this is a housing strategy, so it includes affordable housing, when we get into the actual strategies, that will be having that conversation.
But this chart specifically right here is only for affordable housing.
No, it's site suitable for housing development, not necessarily just affordable housing.
Okay.
The suitability really goes towards getting higher densities, which would create affordability by design in some cases. But it's really just the flatness of it could be any housing development. It could be dual use.
What about you, buddy? You got anything to say? What do you think about this?
I guess I'm still observing. I think you guys are on the right track with how you are rating these criteria and how you're weighting them. The conversation that I've heard that thus far, you're getting close to where you need to be. I think that this obviously involves more variables than just affordable housing. The thing that I see with this map that you guys are really working to adjust is this would condone urban sprawl and degradation of our natural resources, getting our development more densely towards the city centers is going to be better for the community as a whole. There's about almost 38% of the community is renting right now. And to speak specifically to the affordable housing, I think that specifically isn't necessarily going to attract people from the outside, but it's going to make available resources to the people in the community. So I think that's really the importance of what you guys are discussing and debating tonight and it's really about creating, affordable housing it's kind of it's a term that people have many opinions about, but I had to move to Florida so I could afford to buy a house. Now I'm back because I've gained capital, but not everybody has the ability to leave the state to try to build capital financially. There's a lot of people that don't want to leave their city or county. So by getting the density of these high criteria parcels closer to the city centers, I think is going to serve the community at large more effectively than what's here now. So I think you guys are getting there.
Thank you.
I mean, the overall strategy of the housing in Delta County would be to increase, I would think, to increase affordability at all levels, right? Whether it's affordable housing, attainable housing, workforce, and higher income housing, increasing affordability at those levels would be a good general strategy, if there was one to pursue. And so using these criteria helps that. Even if you're talking more expensive housing, increasing that affordability, whether it's for retirees or workforce, these are the criteria you would use to do it, which is density based. And that could be 1 acre parcels or 10 per acre or whatever. It's still you're increasing affordability, which is a nationwide problem, and we're part of that. So that's how I would simplify it.
And for a guy like you, assuming that you were an outside developer coming into Delta County, would the data available through a study like this be of use to take a look at areas? I mean, assuming you came in here and said, I'm interested in this county, I do development, I do housing developments, what do I want to look at as potential areas to do that in Delta County? Wouldn't that data here be very helpful for that?
Well, especially if it was tied to incentives in some way, right? So if there was incentives out there that was geared towards this criteria, and so I think this criteria has to be developed in order to seek an incentive package. Yeah. And so yes, and without incentives, still the same. You want to know where in the county you can do developments to make money or provide affordable housing or whatever. And I'm just one opinion, but
Dave,
I think it's important.
You as an outside developer coming in, the #1 ranked property in this county, is that gonna cost you more money when you come in here and try to buy it, or less?
I don't know what you mean.
Whoever has this #1 ranked property that we're gonna rank it, what's that gonna do to the person that's gonna come in here and buy that and actually develop it? Because more than likely, it's not gonna be the guy that owns it.
So are you really saying that ranking them creates a situation that disincentivizes the affordability because there's a higher value on the higher rents?
It alters the market.
It's good. That's
yeah,
what I'm asking.
it is interesting. So it could alter the market.
I think it should. I don't think we should get into so much of the craziness. Yeah, because if I own them 4 properties, top 4, you won't pay for them.
Right. Exactly. I know. You could decrease affordability, which goes against the whole thing.
You still have to go through the development process. It's still the same land.
Yeah, you can, but
you haven't added any values to this. You just identify areas where you can develop it.
I can't believe you're saying that you didn't add any value to it. That's crazy to me, because if you're the #1 ranking property in this county and you're saying it doesn't add value to it, after how much did this study cost in the time we're done with it?
If I'm the developer and I'm looking at it, then I'm going to walk over. I'm going to go to #2. You're going to charge me way too much for that because you think you're #1. I'm going to go to #2.
And what if number 8's still charging you because you came out of California and he's gonna hammer you too? I mean,
You're seeing these as a priority
of you shouldn't be doing.
private lands, about which one's top,
There's
which
no
one's
more than
bottom
zoning
in the
that's-
priority level. That's not what this is. This is giving a rating to a bunch of land on some sort of scale.
And I don't know that it has to be
No, it
individual properties identified
You could call them
more
a
than
lot of
as
them
much
if
as
you want.
regions, areas or regions that are identified for these things, and the properties within that.
I think it should be broader.
That's all I'm
to,
trying to say.
to your point,
Do
the
your
properties
study.
within that region
Should
could be
be
more
more
suitable for affordability.
So more like what Victoria was talking about, more like a rating out of 100 how each scores versus in comparison to the top 100.
Developmental score.
Yeah, but I don't know if it should be on each single parcel or not. I mean,
But even-
Well, you kind of have to break it down.
but
I mean, I think like this map is a general. Okay, it's sort of intuitive.
yeah, it is, but you can identify the parcels within it. But is this parcel slightly better than that parcel? Because it's, I think they're all going to rank the same. I think they're going to end up ranking very similar if you weight it properly.
Right, we're just putting we're putting a number together that doesn't necessarily rank them, because we may have the top 8 or 10 parcels
Yeah.
that all rate 95 or 98.
Exactly.
They're not necessarily gonna be, that's a number 198, they're all just gonna be like, that's all we're truly trying to identify. So it does address your question about, are we adding value to this? And I think the answer is no. We're just trying to add a criteria. What properties are the most suitable and available for what could be affordable housing? And again, they're gonna rank them based on some of our criteria, which is services, and they're all gonna, the best ones are gonna have those available. That could be 1, that could be 10, it could be 20.
And is it for affordable housing or just housing in general?
Yeah, I know,
In
housing in
general,
general.
right.
Housing in general.
So, I think that maybe we should just start with what we think is like most important, which it sounds like the property being within a municipal boundary. And then we should give that a weight. And then we should work our way down with whatever is the next most important thing to us. And I think that'll be the most efficient way to weed out the things that just really don't matter, because we're gonna run out of our 100 fairly quick if we're weighting them with how important they are. So if it's really important that the parcel is within city boundaries, maybe a 35. Maybe it should be just an outlier of all the other ones, because we really want that to prioritize it.
Yeah, but to Steve's point,
It depends which city.
So do we want to break down the municipalities?
I think you rate it by accessibility to infrastructure.
Again, we've got land in the county that has municipal services running
Yeah.
around.
So it's the services that are more important than being.
Because they're already there, they're placed.
Yeah.
But Carl, can the accessibility be factored into this program because it's not on the GIS? Unless you reach out to the cities and maybe they provide it?
Yeah, that's,
That's what you do?
yeah.
And that all comes with, I mean, if it's in the city or near it, it's generally accessible.
Right.
Right? And so, and if it has a capacity, that's has
Capacity is the part
capacity.
that's not-
That's gonna be more of the controlling factor.
Right.
And I don't know how you gain all that information with the individual city except for asking them.
Well, Paoneer's got a moratorium, so they're out until they get rid of their moratorium.
But it doesn't
Yeah.
change that you still have to locate where their services
Oh, yeah.
are. Just because they have a temporary policy,
That's
which
right.
you still have to know where these services are.
Right.
And those policies will change. And then, okay, the ones that had the highest scores now come into play the first. But again, I guess if we're trying to really do affordable housing, it's gonna be ground that, that also is affordable, which to me is gonna be these publicly owned, or what
Yeah.
Steve described as properties that are owned by the municipalities or the county, or perhaps the school district, or something of that nature, where those properties may lend themselves to be free. And I hate to use the word, but I'm just trying to do it. That's gonna have a higher ranking, almost before services, right? Almost. I mean, if you got free land,
Yeah,
and the services aren't there, you're still gonna look. But if you got free land and you got services.
Yeah.
Well, and if you got free land but none of
There's
those
none that's
services,
left.
your overall score isn't gonna rank very high. It's not gonna you're not gonna get a 95 if all you've got is a publicly owned land portion.
Correct.
If you have publicly owned land within the municipality that has capacity.
Yeah.
That's what you're.
Okay, so number 1, public.
We're just using sort of a developer's criteria for looking at.
but publicly owned land isn't necessarily going to be free.
Not necessarily, but it certainly has,
More flexibility, maybe.
thank you.
Well, what you're gonna try to do ultimately is bring the affordable housing issue to the forefront with some of these public entities and say, look, this is a real issue in this county. We know you wanna sell it, you don't wanna give it away. But guess what? I mean, it's in everybody's interest as a taxable entity in this county to play ball. I mean, there's some cajoling that goes back and forth between governments here.
So what's defined as publicly owned land? Is the school district land publicly owned?
Yep. Special district.
But it sounds like
County,
they don't
city.
want to give their stuff away, and they don't have a housing incentive
I
necessarily.
don't know whoever walks into them and says, look, you have a responsibility here on the affordable housing issue. It's just not the counties and the cities. School district has a part to play in that as well. I mean, it's called straight talk.
Again, we don't really know what the incentives out there are. Could there could be a nice overlap in some incentives where the school district would have some incentive to sell that off or give it away, and the developer has an incentive to develop it into it's hard to envision like what could be out there, but again, having a criteria that would best prioritize these places.
Are you looking at like getting grants or something for this stuff, or what? And where's the incentive?
Well, that having
Yeah.
a program like this actually helps with getting grants, yes.
Or tax breaks,
Or, right.
density exceptions, or
That's where the ranking would have value, is if you're gonna apply for a grant, it's like, this is one of the best parcels that we've identified based on the criteria.
Ranking them can add value. Flat out.
Well, it's not necessarily value as far as purchasing the property, it's still the same property.
Again, we're not ranking them 1 to 10, we're ranking them in terms of the criteria. They're gonna have a score of 90 to 100, ultimately 90.
Totally understand.
Okay.
I'm just
So
saying.
I don't think you're adding-
My opinion says it adds value. So we
Yeah, I don't think it does.
agree to disagree then.
So
I
your
think the
pro-
value's
any
already
property of
there.
yours won't be on it.
We're not assigning any services that
We're
these
making a
properties don't
public
already
knowledge
have.
and doing a study on it.
But that's probably already known by the landowner,
I didn't
yeah,
know
I've
that
got
there
service.
was a high school ground between Hotchkiss and there, that, I didn't know that wasn't public knowledge.
Yeah, but the landowner probably knows that, they know what they're sitting on.
That's why they pose it at $3 million, yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
They know exactly what they're sitting on.
Haven't even done this yet.
Every property owner had to give an easement in order to get those utilities out.
I'm saying it's just not public knowledge and now it's gonna be.
It is public knowledge. I mean, it's a recorded easement that.
Okay, back to our priorities.
Thank you, Kate.
Water, sewer, electric, all rank the same, all get bunched together, and back to the question is availability and capacity grouped together? Are those two separate scores for each of those things? So you
Yeah, I'll
propose
start.
a separate,
I would
like a
propose,
two-tier.
I would propose water, sewer, electric are the three most important things.
Availability or capacity?
Well, I mean, I think it has to be available first, and if there is no capacity, then it's not available, really, right? I guess you can expand capacity, but I think availability, because water rights are going to be harder to obtain than expanding a water treatment facility, right? So that having availability of water is important. And I mean, we can adjust these numbers, but just to start with something, that would give them availability 20 points apiece just for those three things. It's by far the most
Availability
important.
has to be there, but capacity has to trump out availability. I mean, you could have something available, but at the end of the day, if the capacity's not there,
You can expand a water treatment plant or a wastewater treatment plant. They're both expandable, but you can't necessarily go out and buy large amounts of water rights. I mean, you can do that,
Right.
but it's not within your control like expanding a water treatment
Sure.
plant is within your
So availability, you're talking about water rights
Yeah.
versus
Oh,
that
okay.
you have a water line
Oh, okay.
running
Yeah,
in front of your
that's-
property. To me,
well,
that's the availability.
that's.
it is
Like,
available.
can you tap in?
Right.
That's part of it, but I don't know how you differentiate yet that water question on rights versus. I was mostly focused on water
You're
lines.
splitting hairs here on availability
Right.
and capacity. They're both important.
Yeah.
How
I
do
was
you
thinking
prioritize
capacity
one
on
over the
being
other?
able to feed it. You know, you could, if you don't have the capacity to actually get what you
Do
need.
Then do you make it
That's
one
not
available and availability and
Yeah.
capacity
But-
of water services, just
Yeah.
make it one
Yeah.
criteria.
Yeah.
Sure, there you go.
Make
I
an
like that.
assumption that it includes capacity.
Yeah.
Well, if you make it one criteria where availability and capacity are together, would that not be a little bit more clarity on this?
Yeah, so let's do that. And I think those are each 25% of the score. I mean, that's 75% of the criteria right there.
But do
Personally.
we do public before that too, or is this kind of everything after public, or do we not have consensus on whether we should include public lands?
Maybe if we drop the score from each one of those by 5 points to 20, we could give the 15 to public.
That's probably right.
Okay, so we're still at 75%.
And then,
And then 15 to public.
Mhm.
I'm just throwing over there,
Sure.
we can change them, but just,
so,
And we should probably have some criteria for the physical characteristics of the property.
right,
You know, which includes to me the geotechnical information as well.
slopes and geotech.
Yeah.
I mean, that's at least 10 points.
Can that be,
Or
yeah,
five-
each or
five each.
combined?
Combine it for now, it could be separated. And then, you know, I put zoning in front of gas even, because if it's zoned R1 in most districts, I guess it depends on district, but Cedars, for instance, that allows four units per.
but zoning can be changed.
Like this could inform.
So this
our
would,
zoning.
this can help inform the
Can take
zoning,
it
so
out. Sure.
it's kind of the, you know,
Okay.
would,
Then, I mean, gas is part of that, you know, natural gas.
so add an availability and capacity of natural gas?
Yeah, because it's not insurmountable to just do an all-electric system, but.
But so does gas need to be
Really?
there? No?
You
Yeah.
knocked it out
Gas
already
is-
once. Now you're putting it back in.
I mean, it is helpful to have
It
it.
is, but that's like so down the line on what, you know,
Yeah.
are you gonna have to pave a whole street in the city? That might be important over natural gas.
Do what?
Well, but we're talking about ranking. If there's a property that ranks exact same on all of these, and one has natural gas availability and one doesn't, do we want to rank the one with natural gas higher than the one that doesn't?
There's so many other variables though, like all the infrastructure you have to put in to get there. Is it a dirt road right now, curb gutter, paved?
Well, right. So
versus-
so are we saying that we would rather prioritize development in the place that already has that infrastructure?
Well,
Or
You're
not.
you're gonna assume, this may be an overstatement, but all the municipalities have an agreement with Black Hills Energy to have natural gas in their towns. So it's gonna be available, and it's gonna have capacity within the
yeah,
municipality.
capacity isn't an issue for gas, and it's probably.
And availability, but you might have to pay to have a gas line, but Black Hills, yeah, they just put a big line all the way.
Yeah.
So
all the way
if you
through,
have
yeah.
municipal location already is a criteria, it seems to me you got gas covered.
Do we have we don't now have municipal location as a criteria ranked yet?
Right.
Is that
But
next?
I mean,
or do we want to just make it municipal and then, like you're saying, gas is
I mean,
assumed?
it almost
thought we did.
because you have all those services, you're going to either be municipal or close to it. So in the Hotchkiss case where they don't, I think it's better to not be in the municipality but still have all those services. Personally,
Not for Hotchkiss, but you're
that's what
right,
I'm saying.
for a developer.
For a developer, right? So I don't think municipality has anything to do with it. Or you could almost rank it if you have the services and you're not and you're only in the county. God, that's the first choice, I think.
On the gas, on bigger developments and stuff, they'll actually bring that stuff in for free or actually pay you. The last one I did, they paid me $700 a tap every time I use it. They send me a check for $700. They pay me, and they don't pay.
Yeah.
Made their
So that's an incentive though for the developer,
We're gonna put 400,000 into the street here.
and that's an incentive for the developer. So it should be ranked.
I still think we should put some weight on the municipalities, like them being in the municipalities, because just thinking about the criteria that we're, putting a lot of weight on is basically saying, like, all the trouble we've been having with the land code, if you have the services, you can build however many houses you want. Like, you're really pushing to, if you have the services, you can do it, rather than where does it make sense to do it? It makes sense to do it in the city. So instead of focusing on in the city, now we're focusing on the services which you can expand. Availability is important, capacity, like you said, can be expanded on, but I just still think I personally would like to see the other 15 at least on the municipality, because I think that's really important. Just like the publicly owned land, it's just, and like we're all saying, we're doing this study when we all know that most of the parcels are in the city limits.
Or the growth management area. So you could combine them too. You could say within the municipal boundary or GMA and just have it as one criteria.
I would agree with that. I think it would.
Because it's either in or
create-
close.
It would limit the issue of the urban sprawl too far. We've already kind of identified where we want that sprawl to be, or kind of the limits of that sprawl that we're looking at reasonably soon. So but yeah, including the GMA in that score includes some of these unincorporated areas that we want to be
So
able
we
to
can keep it separate and score them separate like that, or put it together, or or how, whatever. What do you think?
I think the fact that you already have services most likely means you're in the city, and if you don't have to go to the city to get services, I think that's a bigger incentive, and that's a rare case, this Hotchkiss case. So maybe that would arbitrarily drive up the value of that land, to Hardy's point, but that yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's by having those services, you're already in the city essentially, or you're going to be annexing to the city. So yeah.
So you're suggesting there shouldn't be a score for municipal boundary?
It's inherent almost when you meet those other criteria. I mean, I wouldn't die on the hill. I just don't think it's a necessary. I don't know what else the city gets you except for a bunch of headaches.
Is that the same then for the GMA?
Building permit, they get you that.
Right, and your costs go up, right? Because you have building permits and different schedules and stuff. You're still going to build to code, but
hopefully
it's still
right.
Yeah, when you're talking on big units like that, it's a considerable cost.
Yeah.
We're talking like a 20 unit apartment complex. We're talking some blue.
Especially if the cities have, and I don't think any cities here have restrictive energy codes like they do down south, but yeah. But I don't think that they should do that.
No.
I think on the water, it's different because it's so different where we're at. You're like north of the Gunnison is a whole different animal where you're talking about. Down in here, your Tri-County water. It's not, getting water up there is a whole different animal than getting water down here. Or I guess Paonia. It sounds like Paonia's quite the hurdle. So.
City of Delta has quite a bit of water though, don't they?
Huh?
City of Delta.
Yeah, I know, but it's, yeah, they have their own. And the Tri-County water, if they're, just depends on if they have enough to expand it. I think they're on top of everything, obviously.
Okay, so going back, there's kind of a split opinions about whether municipality and growth management areas should be on this ranking or whether they are kind of inherent in the other rankings that we're giving. How do we decide that?
I think it would make a difference just because, like someone mentioned earlier, if you have a parcel that has the same score because it has all of the utilities, and then you have a parcel in the city that has all the utilities, the one in the county is not going to get scored, or the one in the city is not scored any higher because it's not a criteria for us to be going into the city. So if you give it some weight, some points, that could make it could be the factor that makes the one in the city the developed one rather than the one in the county.
Mm-hmm.
Encouraging city-centered growth.
Yeah, because I understand there's better incentives for building outside of city limits, that the city, council is more restrictive and stuff, and you have more permits and there's more expenses, but it just makes so much more sense to build in the city. It doesn't make any sense to put apartments in the middle of Crawford. It just doesn't make any sense.
Other than these three parcels we're talking about, I'm not aware of anywhere else in this county that has that.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but
We're not aware of.
well, we're not saying that it has to be the factors that this map was given to us is based off this list. So this map is going to be completely changed as soon as we give in our new list, and our new list has totally different factors. It's just saying if you have water, wastewater, and electricity, and developable soil, you can put up apartment complexes. So I'm just saying we should really try to make it more,
So just pick some points that you think,
I think
I'm not
15.
disagreeing with you. You just really are gonna lower the points that you give the other ones.
So if Victoria gives it 15, we're at 100.
and I think we should combine maybe the growth management and municipalities.
As a 10-point, you can assign whatever you want, and to reduce the other ones down, instead of, what do we have, 20 points on the other ones?
Well,
You can go to
Victoria says she wants to give 15 to the municipality and the GMA, which, if we do that with everything else that we've already done, gives us 100.
Okay.
That means we can either stop there, or say there's some other things we think are important,
And lower some.
and lower
others.
some, and play with those numbers.
If you thought there were other criteria that was.
Right.
I want to give Victoria credit here about the municipalities. One thing we've not talked about is police protection, fire protection. We're going to get those in a more concentrated way within the cities than you are within the other.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So if you've got your 15, you're up to 100.
At this point, right.
Yeah, right now.
Unless you want to make some
Unless
changes.
there's anyone-
That's
yeah,
why
is
I'm
there
kind of doing this
anything
on the
on
fly.
here?
You can-
So can
I mean-
can you go over the criteria that we've got and make points? Can we just, it's up there already?
See right there, left side? Well, as she's been talking, see where just did municipalities out in GMA?
Up there, I didn't see it.
So,
Okay,
That gives you
here's
kind
our
of a
100,
bird's
all
eye
the other
view of
ones,
it right there.
all the other ones go away.
yeah, the one,
Can we get our money
I'm
back
going with, if
from
it's
Contour?
red, those are the
Is
ones
that a
that
job?
are scored.
I mean, I do think that the slopes and soil conditions, or especially slopes, less than 30% are more important than we're ranking them, because slopes at more than 30% add a ton of cost, and so you're going to be less incentivized, or you're not going to obtain affordability as easily.
In the middle roads.
You can't.
Well, not safer.
It's not cut and fill.
I would add, just for a point here, the consistency with the master plan. Not to say the other one was not consistent, but this, in our discussion here tonight, really is
More consistent.
linked with that background discussion and why certain elements were brought up in the master plan.
True. Maybe you ought to combine that soils and slopes kind of a deal.
Would there be a way to kind of give an overall ranking of,
How are you gonna know if it's got soils
suitability,
and soil?
building suitability or something,
How are you gonna rank
So you're
it?
thinking,
Is
put
it-
the soils and slopes together, Ted? Is that
Well,
what
I'm
you're
thinking, how are you
Harvey?
gonna tell me if
But,
it's,
what does developable soil mean? Because can't you, it's just expensive.
Right.
So-
But you're decreasing affordability. So I think, I don't know what our
What's the
strategy
definition of
is.
But what does developable mean?
What is that?
If everything is developable, if there's like a certain level of
You know what I
mitigation,
think
how do
of
you
when I
rank
think
what's
developable is
prioritized?
Redlands Mesa in Grand
And
Junction.
our things in
I mean,
all housing.
the houses up there that are sloping off towards the river and, wow, I don't know. if
Yeah, and they're
the testing
two-
wasn't done
they're
proper,
2, 3,
but
4
there's
million bucks.
multi-million-dollar homes that are
Right.
worth nothing.
Right, but how do you put that
How do you
into
rank that?
criteria? What do
I
you
don't know,
call it?
that's what I'm saying, how would you rank that, that's the question.
Well, I think it's important. I think it's important if you're trying to assess if your strategy is to make housing increase affordability.
But I thought we weren't.
I
doing
guess
that. I thought
the
this was
question, the question for
How
me,
increase affordability on all levels of housing. I'm not talking about affordable housing.
You know, someone's building the unaffordable houses, that's gonna free up some more affordable houses.
Right, I agree.
So I don't think we ought to put a dollar value on about anything.
I'm not, but I'm just saying, housing affordability on all levels is a nationwide issue. Moving in, moving up, and creating wealth by being able to buy and sell housing is a huge driver to create capital. And so, but if that's not the strategy of Delta County, then we should define that differently. I don't know, increasing housing affordability is at all levels is probably part of the strategy. I don't know what else is contained within our Delta County housing strategy.
So I just made it site suitability. Parcels having shallower slopes, less than 30%, and soil stability are more preferable. If you want, you could add outside of MAP floodplain,
That's a good one.
into that same classification.
yeah.
So, but here's the point: is that it should be ranked higher.
So you want to
Especially-
give more points to that.
For instance, I own a parcel in a municipality, but a lot of the slopes are more than 30%, which means that it's not nearly as beneficial to create
So do you think
housing on it.
maybe the one that we have 20% on, which would be the availability and capacity of water services, will we have a 20? Are you thinking that's too high?
Well, I'm just
Where-
saying it outweighs the fact that the slopes are more than 30% outweighs the fact that it's in a municipality at all
Okay.
for affordability.
Okay.
And so I'm speaking against my own interest here.
You're not building affordable anything else.
Right. Well, no, we're building attainable. But the point is, the fact that it's a municipality, great, yeah, give me a grant for that. But the fact that it's steeper slopes and it's
So you're
I
saying
think what
switch
you're saying
the
is
score?
That
Municipal
the
10
criteria is about
suitability.
equal with some of the other ones in terms of points. So you've got to reduce some of the others from 20, raise that one to 15, and then let's see what's left over.
Yeah, I would.
I mean, that's all we're doing, is just shifting numbers.
Yeah.
I think the public owned land should go down a little because I mean, the private owned land, the public owned lands. I don't think I think that's far-fetched, to be honest with you. I don't know if that's gonna happen, to be honest. What's your take on taking a school and turning it into a 30-unit apartment complex?
Well, and I think that there's a lot of resource there because you already have the infrastructure, you got the exoskeleton, right?
You gotta tear out the whole floor,
Yeah, you gotta
all
tear
those
out
are on concrete.
Right.
So, the whole
Or you
thing
can
goes
raise the
back.
floor, but the point is, you have a lot of costs already factored in.
Versus
And you have
inside.
access, and you have water sewer taps, and you might have to increase that. Yeah, there's costs, but I don't think that a shell should be discounted at all.
And
I think it brings resources.
Public-owned land could be a vacant piece, or a piece of that land could be a vacant piece, and there could be a community building in the section that's already built that doesn't need to be turned in. You know, there's publicly owned land that is not heavily developed yet.
Yeah.
That we still maybe want to push development
Higher
towards.
than being in a floodplain.
You're gonna have to jump in if you want.
Yeah, I don't know, but how does it sound that we move 2 points off of each 20 up to site suitability, so it's 16, so it would make it more weighted if it was site suitable than if it was in municipality, but still the highest ranks are your services. Like 18, 18, 18, that would be 16. And getting closer.
Now we just have
As
to
long
do
as it
harder
adds up to
math in our
100,
heads, Victoria.
No, that's why I use the Excel, because it can add it a lot quicker than I can.
Yeah, when it comes down to it, you're gonna be very close to it.
You either got it or you don't.
So, and I don't want to beat this bush, but like I said, I own a parcel, meets these criteria. It's steep and therefore expensive. The fact that it's a municipality versus a county is a detriment to me because it's driven the cost of the development way more. So you're giving points to something that's actually a negative.
Right, but we might be able to incentivize that in a way that your costs are actually lower because you meet the criteria for an incentive program where we want development to happen.
Okay.
But are you?
That may have
Kate-
more to do with the municipality that you're
Yeah.
in.
Kate, are you just suggesting that the 15 should be a lower score?
I think the 15 should be lower, and those points go this. Yeah, I mean, water, power, and sewer should heavily outweigh everything.
So putting these back at 20, reducing this, and putting more into the site suitability?
Yeah, I mean, you did make a good point, that maybe it creates an incentive, but I think the incentive's already there due to the other things. So give it some, but
But we don't want the development outside of the cities, or outside of the growth management areas, that's the thing.
we want the clustered growth, which is near the services. That's the important part of having, the services are near the municipality or in them anyway.
Or in the growth management.
Right.
We're not given those points location. That's like if you don't make, like your property wouldn't get those 16 points. Because it's like
Exactly.
if you're less,
Right.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
Right.
It's not an affordable place.
But it would
Exactly.
gain the 15 of being within the municipality.
Right.
Yeah, but
I think Steve's point about being in the municipality adds what,
Mhm.
police protection, fire
That's a
protection.
good point. And
Yeah.
yeah, so
So I think there is some
your fire ratings are lower,
Yeah,
insurance
all that
ratings.
stuff. I can't get away with that.
Or you could reduce public owned lands if you, I mean, if you were looking for points from somewhere to add
Yeah, I
somewhere.
think Hardy makes a good point on that. I mean, public owned lands, if they're available, there should be an availability or clause in there, you know.
Save the world.
I don't wanna throw
Are
one
we gonna
direction.
fully discount gas?
We eliminated gas. Cause we figure if you're near a municipality, then you probably just have it.
Well, I have gas, why not county?
Yeah.
But that's where Hardy was saying though, that the
doesn't-
gas company actually incentivizes it already.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll pay, like the last one I did, they paid me to put the gas in. I mean, every one you put on, they give you $700. They want it, they want to sell the gas.
I think there might be a criteria that can encompass all the things that you folks are talking about. And that is, in terms of the site selection, when you're choosing a site to develop, it's always gonna be, more affordable and more environmentally sensitive and community sensitive to redevelop a previously developed site. So I guess I'm just kind of presenting a question to you guys, is there a criteria that could encompass our sewer, gas, electric by saying we want to give priority to sites that have been previously developed because they potentially have some or all of those utilities already in place?
They may not have enough water though.
Right.
Yeah.
But,
Or sewer.
Yeah, right.
I mean, everything goes over.
yeah.
That's what I was saying, like it's.
Well, in the reusable building thinking, you're absolutely right. Our reusable buildings primarily are going to be warehouses.
Yeah.
And, I mean, your point's well taken there.
Well,
There's
not
probably
warehouses.
Well, there's probably some elements there that are usable for housing. I mean, there may be a concrete floor and there may be utilities in. But that's really gonna be our majority, I think, of what our reusable buildings are.
Yeah, I
We
mean-
have a few, like the schools, we have this hospital that TK talks about. That's been empty for years in South Delta.
There's a school down there that's also owned by Catholic Services, out of Munich, who own the hospital. No, I think there are buildings. You know, I see some of the big buildings, the warehouses along the bypass, and they actually already have housing units in them, but, yeah, I don't know. It was a great start. Look at only commercial or industrial type of buildings.
It's probably a pretty small amount of buildings that do fit the criteria that, to Hardy's point, that aren't super expensive to redevelop. The school maybe and a couple other things. So it should get some weight, but maybe it's not a heavy amount of weight.
Reduce public and add a category, just like a 5-pointer or something for a redevelopable land.
I sort of go back to the old, I keep in my mind, I'm running back to the old, is it the city market?
Mhm.
That's now the library, right?
Mhm.
I mean, at one point it was vacant, it was empty. Who bought it? The school bought it. School county.
No, the Sandal Company,
Chacos.
Chaco Sandal.
Chaco owned it. Then the school district bought it from them with the intent of using it for a school. And then it morphed into the library, and the library got it because it was owned by the school district. So that in many ways they got it. Did they pay for it? Or, I mean, they may have gotten it for free. I don't know if they bought it outright, but the answer is those type of properties. Had that school or had that property been vacant right now, it probably would rank fairly high in what we're doing.
Yeah, but it's a pretty small building for so many units.
A library is a different deal than a multi.
Well, it is today, but when it was Chaco, it was just a big manufacturing facility. You could probably put 20 units there.
Yeah.
Here's the deal, I mean, on a national basis, Safeway and Kroger are talking about doing away with one or the other. You're talking about the potential of other buildings coming up. I mean, I hate to see that happen here, but, I mean, it's all owned by Albertsons, I think, and they're gonna make corporate decisions, and that's gonna filter down in our town. So there's always alternative opportunities that arise, and what we're talking about here is being able to take advantage of some of those if they do. And with some sort of strategy.
Yeah, we don't
Doesn't mean
want-
you can afford it, but it,
We want to avoid missing teeth in our municipalities, so empty storefronts and things like that as much as possible. And having some sort of incentive for people to use land that already has everything there is, it's economically more viable. There's more grants and money available for whoever purchases that land from whatever entities that they want to get grants from. Yeah, personally, I'm always looking at something that's been previously developed as the first options. It's usually in a good location, it has services, you might have some sort of infrastructure, you might have some sort of superstructure, you know, the nitty gritty of like what you can turn a grocery store into is, you know, that's debatable with architects and engineers, but you know, the sky is the limit with what anything is possible with time and money. We just want to be able to reduce the money that it's costing for these things as much as possible.
Or have greater capacity. So that, again, what comes to mind from the development side would be the old John Deere dealership, which is now up for sale, is at TK Mining. I mean, it's got all the infrastructure, it's got some buildings on it, and it has quite a bit of land that's not being utilized. It's close to the highway. All the other things that, you know, that were originally put here to make you feel good, it's there.
Does it have sewer?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Is it in floodplain?
Nope.
John Deere used to
It's
be.
right next to the other apartment, I guess.
there's a restaurant right there.
Right before the bridge.
Oh, yeah.
That's the potential for the north.
They want a lot of money for it.
Potentially the north bypass of
Right, we're not,
the intersection.
Yeah.
right, we're not saying whether or not they want a lot of money
Right.
for it, we're trying to say
It's
whether-
ideal.
It's suitable.
We're trying to think like a developer,
Yeah.
right? What is gonna work here for what we wanna do? If you're the developer of affordable housing, what works? Okay, if you came to the city and said, hey, we'll build affordable housing on this property, but you have to own it. Meaning the city has to go get a grant, buy it, and bring it into the thing. There's a lot of different ways to skin that cat on the cost. And that's really what we're trying to set up. What are those properties that are likely to have someone look at it? And that's really what we're trying to do here. You know, we keep talking about the incentives. That to me is policy, and I'm a little uncomfortable creating incentives on the county level and telling the city, oh, by the way, we created these incentives and you got to live
We
on it.
aren't necessarily creating those incentives.
No,
We are
I-
making criteria for incentives that may be already available as a way. We are making a information available for people to take advantage of incentives that may already exist or may potentially exist or
Yeah, I don't
or
know.
that we may create.
I don't know that any incentives exist, but that's essentially where we're going.
It's called a reference plan that is there to take advantage of opportunities that arise. I'll give you an example. Foster Farms, where it's located in Confluence Park, was owned by a coal company. City of Delta bought it for $1 because they wanted to get out of it. It had some underground tanks, and benzene and all that kind of stuff. So the city underwrote any liability they might have that would follow them, so they would take it on. But that was the stimulus for $1 to take on that piece into a pretty interesting multi-use kind of property. But we had a plan early on that somebody put together that we were able to look at and say, you know, there's some sort of thinking that occurred about that whole area. We were able to refer back to that. And the opportunity arose, we took advantage of it, got all kinds of grant money, millions of dollars to come in there. That's what's called planning, and it starts with things like we're talking about right now.
So, going back to the scoring, I adjusted the water, wastewater, electrical down and site suitability up. Is that where we want to be? I've heard, you know, different things, so.
TK, I think the incentives are important, really important. 'Cause I mean, what gets people from come to Delta and use the John Deere building versus go up to Montrose? Because there's incentives up there, extensive incentives.
And that's, if you're gonna think like a developer, that's what we're doing right now, right? As a developer, the first thing I wanna know is, what's the incentives for me to come here? Because right now, Delta County's struggling in this department. We have no incentives, other than incentives that are out there already. You gotta go find them. We need to have something that's right here to bring people here. If not, it's gonna stay the same. This mapping may do nothing for us.
Yeah, I think there are the conditions in Montrose County or Mesa County are just vastly different than they are in Delta County. We may be talking about,
Okay.
like Steve did, talk about buying something to do it, like could happen with the school, but they're not talking like that. They may have incentives to abate you some taxes in Montrose and
So
Mesa County.
the whole incentive question is kind of cart before the horse. Like, we have to develop the criteria before we even talk about what those incentives are. We as a planning commission are probably not going to be in charge of most of those incentives if they happen. Like, we may have some say in land use code incentives. But anyways, our task tonight is to land on something that we feel like we all sort of agree with in terms of if there are incentives created to encourage development, what are those criteria? I think we've done that fairly well. And I would just say if anyone has any objections to the numbers where they stand now, would be a good time
So
to
I've
argue your
reordered
point.
it, so the bottom in the red are the criteria, and I've put them in order as far as the ranking based on the scoring. That helps.
And is there a defined housing strategy that I missed at the beginning of this meeting or something?
That this is going to help inform developing that.
Create the strategy.
Yes.
If you take lands off of the publicly owned, just say publicly owned. I don't.
Publicly
we
owned
wanna
property
include-
or
we wanna
parcels.
include existing structures.
Yeah, publicly owned parcels.
What's that?
That your equation got messed up when you
Yeah, so-
reordered things.
Hold
We
on.
dropped our percentage down.
Okay.
So is it more a publicly owned facility versus publicly owned land? And then what's the difference between that and
Well, it could be land or it could be a building,
aside my
just publicly
misspelling
owned.
there?
just publicly owned.
I think publicly owned parcel encompasses everything.
Parcel refers, most people think of it as land. I mean,
That's
if
right.
it's publicly owned, it could be a building, it may not.
With that, I would say we're at a pretty good spot. Anyone last comments?
We
Last
reached the
questions? We- All right. Any other department reports or anything else we need to talk about tonight before we adjourn?
Austin?
All right. That we're adjourned.
You want us to keep these or be?
You can keep them. I mean, obviously they're going to change, but.
Right, they're obsolete, right?
Yep.
I guess that, if we're gonna do this,